Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Disc Guidance segment with the 2MK team. Once again, we are going through a new bot. And as we've finally done all of the tests to figure out which characters that bot works well with, it has received its code name. Specifically, Snow Angel. As always, our bots are specifically meant to help you learn particular things about the game, and this one is more advanced than our last release, Big Fire. I do not, however, have any helpers today for actually showing it off, so bear with me because it will both take about as long as last time and require me to make a couple more pauses just to make sure that I am keeping everything straight as I go along. I'm going to start this off in the usual way. The format of these streams/videos is usually the same, and in this case it's only going to be slightly different, showing off different characters and their behaviors with the bot. Not so much comparisons to CPU, because this is King of Fighters and it doesn't tend to work out. Then some basic explanations of why the bot is built the way it is, and then explanations of the various inputs used to create it. I shouldn't need to re-enter it today. As you can see, all of the slots are still functional, but it might be a little bit hard to explain some of it without doing at least one of them, so I may get around to that. However, you can reference one of our previous streams, particularly the very last stream on this topic, the last Disc Guidance, to check and see what we've got. I'm starting with Ramon because he's not actually part of the main set of characters that are supposed to use the bot. He does have some functionality for it. He's not terrible, basically. But just while I babble, to have something on the screen that isn't one of the ones you have to focus on later. And you can look at it and see, does this look useful to you in some way? Hopefully, probably not too much. The purpose of any given bot is to teach you one aspect of the game by making you count through succeeding at the aim of the bot rather than whether or not you can deal enough damage. In fact, as you can see from my health, my opponent recovers health and I do not, because I'm just supposed to be counting a number of times I succeed at something. But this time, as with last time, we have managed to create one bot that covers about 4 to 5 characters. And that's not counting Ramon or Dinosaur, who is the other one that you might get a little out of it. Enough that you could care to use it at some point. But bots in this game are input much the same way as they are for what we tend to call anime games. They're not saved per character, they just work on all of the characters you have available to you. You switch character to get the same inputs with no change at all, and the new character will just use all those inputs. Depending on their capacity, therefore, they're either really useful for learning something or terrible. Dinosaur, for example, almost made the cut, but he didn't seem consistent on the re-entry. Characters have different outcomes based on how perfectly the bot was input, and I needed to make sure that they were as consistent as possible. Rather than just the one input we got that went pretty well, I needed to make sure that all of them would keep working. That said, he's so close that I probably am going to base some stuff on this until I've learned more about the character as a whole. The real reason that he would not make a good bot is because it's like the simplest possible things you actually need to do against him. You just like kick here and use your longest move there, and that's about all you're going to really learn, particularly because, as noted, the way he's been input means that some of the stuff that I thought he was going to do consistently, he doesn't actually do in this form of the input, whereas all the other bots we were using are at least consistent enough that everyone out there could input the thing with the same intention and get approximately the same result. But you can bear it in mind because at the end of the day, learning a couple things from a character that's extremely rare is still pretty useful. He almost has what we usually refer to as a point system. In his case, mostly it's learning when to hit like kick and learning when to throw. Add to that the length of your longest attacks and you've got something. Is it particularly useful? That's harder to judge. But with those two out of the way, let's move on to the, I believe, 5 characters who actually do fit into the bot as it's supposed to be used. And while they might have different goals in terms of what you are trying to get points-wise, they're mostly teaching you similar things. So they have all fallen under the same codename, Snow Angel. When inputting this, therefore, if you see any bots marked with the Snow Angel codename, it means that you can use those bots without any changes at all to the inputs you are using. And of course, they got that nickname because even though we intended to start with Angel, with all of her various very complicated chain, circle, and similar things, we realized that it works really well for Kula. And interestingly, just literally every character starting from Kula and going to Chris. And I did check every single one of them, so this isn't just me being lazy, it actually is just this set of characters, which makes it even easier to remember who it is for. But it will be harder to remember what it is for. So let's go straight to the titular person, the one who this was based on, and describe briefly why the bot was built the way it was. In order to attack in this game, you often need 3 specific skills. The first is simply getting close to your opponent without getting hit, usually dashing and blocking. You can similarly hop, well, for those of us with the skills to easily instant hop. Some people can only do it from one side, some people can't do it consistently. I think I'm in the one side group there. There are multiple ways that you can learn to input hops and jumps to get what you want. Similar to the hyper hop, which is even more complicated. But the idea being that if you need to learn to play offense, even if only for short periods, you often need to practice against a character that is good at stopping you from doing that without necessarily putting themselves at too much risk. Therefore, if you're thinking about trying to get punishes or specific zoning techniques, she's not the best. But there is something to be said for that a little later with other characters using the same inputs, so it makes it an even more helpful bot than usual. My goal here then is to get to Angel and do one of 3 things. Either throw her, either as I've run all the way up to her and managed to get the throw, or thrown her on reaction to her rolling. Notice that she can switch sides without necessarily rolling, and if you do too much of it yourself, you're just going to get grabbed. Putting yourself into her range is usually a bad plan, but In many ways, that's why we chose this bot. It's hard enough to do that you have to think about it. Similarly, you want to land certain quicker combos by dashing up the same way. If you don't think it's a good idea to go for the throw, either because you must get too close, or it's just not going to be useful as a whiff punish style thing, you want to do this instead. In my case, I'm technically failing at it because it's supposed to be a full combo, rather than just the 2 hits of the crouch light kick, crouch light punch. And if you are the type who doesn't have an auto combo that you feel comfortable using in those situations, you don't want to do that either. Geese, as a generality, needs to do heavy Reppuken in that same position, i.e. the double as you've just seen it, but in order for this to work I had to be close enough for it to be a good idea and not mess up any other inputs. Similarly, when you're dashing up, you can use that moment to recognize, oh, I shouldn't go for the low, I should in fact just throw her. It also helps you practice a specific aspect of throwing in the game, particularly if you dash and then attempt to throw. I'll turn off the bot to demonstrate. If I'm running and I hit heavy punch, even though I'm holding forward heavy punch, there's no throw. If I release it, obviously, no throw. The only way I can throw quickly from that is to press back heavy punch, as you can see in the side. And the faster you can move from one to the other, the better. But if you move too quickly, even that can be confusing. In my case, it takes 3 frames, as you see from the empty space, to move from the forward hold to the back heavy punch. Even though I'm generally quite good at getting those close to the same frame, if not on the same frame, you can mess this up in all sorts of ways. Not running far enough, not understanding how far you need to run, and so on. Similarly, deciding which of the 2 things to use, as forward and back in this game don't decide which direction your opponent is going. In fact, it doesn't decide anything. It's kick to throw them backward and forward to throw them forward. Heavy punch to throw them forward. So doing all of this while Angel is fighting you is close to being able to whiff punish her. But you'll notice she also jumps. And you have to be ready when she jumps, and it's not terribly often either. So you also get a point, as we call them, for landing the anti-air. These will possibly be very slightly changed or verified in some way, slightly shifted, to make them even more effective at training, but the core concept is the same. As we've mentioned on prior streams, there's so much running up to people, dashing at the correct time in this game, that having a whole bot to train you to dash correctly is kind of important. And of course, she will tech throws as well, because she is encoded in a way that allows her to do them. So you get practice with your light kick, heavy punch, whatever other combos at close range, usually very important for keeping your opponent away from you. But also, one of the most useful ways to quickly hit people who are very close, because they might not be guarding their legs. Whereas crouch and light punches can often be mid-hits, as we say, and you don't actually have to be crouch blocking in order to deal with them. This bot is relatively complicated to input, but not necessarily difficult, which is kind of hard to explain because Angel herself is a confusing character in a lot of ways. that means we can now go into explaining exactly what that consists of. As noted, I don't have to input these today. If you're not familiar with inputting bots, you probably shouldn't even be using this one. Go reference our Kyobot for Big Fire and definitely start with that, because if you're not necessarily familiar with inputting bots at all, you might as well start with one where you will be able to more quickly notice whether or not it's working. And technically that one is the harder one to input, so you'll be able to see what limitations you hit. This one is just complicated, not hard. You won't be able to see on the screen, and technically you are never able to see on the screen what the inputs are for bots in this game, so it doesn't really matter. I just have to explain it as clearly as I can. So we're just going to replay the slot 1 repeatedly. But first I will explain what exactly it is. Fortunately, slot 1 is fairly simple, and I will demonstrate something else. If I were to be recording right now, there is a button I could hit to start a recording. In my case, it's usually L1 on a control pad, but it doesn't specifically matter which button you use for this. It just has to be a button you can hit while holding other buttons. In this case, for example, I want to input forward for Angel, note which side she's on right now, and think of the things on the left side of the screen as pertaining to her. Forward, heavy punch plus heavy kick, hold that the whole time, and then do a half circle back. As you can see here, if you do it right, and you can use this method without any recording where you can see all the inputs to test how well you're managing. And that's it. You end the recording at that moment. If things are working correctly, you will either see the last input will just be the heavy punch plus heavy kick, or back heavy punch plus heavy kick. What you normally see is a big gap between them. So it would look more like this. Not close enough to what I'm trying to demonstrate here. I don't think there is a way to get that to look quite right, actually. So I'll probably get back to that with re-recording later if this didn't make sense in some way. You can hold these to start, tap the button to start the recording, do the motion, and tap the button again. And that's the main thing you need to understand. You hold it for the entire time, because if you hold any set of buttons for the entirety of a recording, it works the same as if you hold the button here. I've held the button for Geese. I'm still holding it, but he is not taking any actions because I'm holding it and not pressing it again. If I mash a button, he will just keep on punching. If I hold the button, he doesn't do anything. We have recently learned that you also have to care whether or not this is set to anything higher than 0. So please make sure, if you're having trouble getting the result I'm about to show off, that this is set to 0 frames. If I start Angel's repeat function, she will kick once and then just wiggle. This is because, from the game's perspective, the bot is still holding heavy punch and heavy kick. And the input tells you how many frames you took to do it too, although you also get this information while you're recording it in a different way. So that's all you actually want out of that one altogether, just a wiggle. For slot 2, again, you're trying to remember you always do things from the perspective of the character you're recording for Angel, not for which character you have. So in this case, I want to hold down, forward, heavy kick, and light kick together. And And I'm not actually holding this for the entirety of the input this time. I'm going to release it and then quickly do a quarter circle forward from Angel's perspective, heavy punch, and end the recording there. Normally you don't want to be holding the heavy punch at the end of the recording either. But honestly, it doesn't always matter, and we'll get back to why that is. Very tiny changes to whether or not you're holding buttons has drastic effects on the bot for a complex reason that is best explained on our website, 2-mk.org, but I will try to touch on a little bit later on. But as you can see on the side of the screen, down forward, release everything, quickly quarter circle forward, heavy punch. And you do want to do that quite quickly, and you want to end the recording quite quickly, because otherwise it gets a little bit choppy in terms of her behavior. So a little later I'm going to explain why it was so important to do that way, and some changes you can make to make the bot more or less effective based on that fact. But the one thing I will show you now is simple. Since we were holding the heavy kick for the entirety of action 1, and we start action 2 with a down forward heavy kick plus light kick, the same thing happens. If you ever reach a point where action 1 plays in full and then is followed by action 2, she will do a different kick. She will only do down forward light kick, because as far as the game is concerned, she didn't hit down forward heavy kick. She didn't hit a heavy kick at all. She was just holding heavy kick the whole time. Getting her to do this is a little bit more complicated, and letting you see that she's doing it is even harder because of the specifics of the way Angel's moves work to begin with. She is doing the thing, but I don't know how to necessarily verify to you that it's happening if you're not familiar with what her... There we go. Had to stand close enough to get it blocked. Her down forward light kick is that, whereas her down forward heavy kick is this. That is a edge shift, as we call it, and you can find that information again on the website if it's not clear as to why it works that way. We're going to be putting in a couple more later, and if you're really creative and think you understand bot theory as a whole after poking around this bot and reading the page, if you even needed to do that, feel free to mess around with this bot to get whatever result you want. But note, it will affect all of the other bots if you are trying to use them. We can't guarantee that much. Action 3 is a little bit more complicated, but not so much so that you'd probably not be able to understand it off the bat. If we push all 3 of these buttons and figure out whatever way you want to, because the rest of the input is not all that difficult. You just need to find a way to have one hand, maybe not even one hand, depending on how you do it, hold 3 buttons for the entirety of an input. And again, remember, we're doing this from Angel's perspective, so I'm holding forward as from her point of view. Light punch, light kick, and heavy kick. And then start the recording and do not quite that. You don't actually want to go all the way to the back direction. You want to stop at down back, and you want to spend as little time as possible at up forward. But again, you will not be able to see this while you're doing the thing, so be careful with that. This is one of the ones that you're going to have to check the most, because as you can see, spending too long trying to do the thing correctly is a problem, but doing it too quickly leaves out some inputs, and the game cares a little bit about these inputs, so you are going to have to recheck her quite a lot when you're doing this specific one. But the overall idea is simply to get what you can now see on screen almost, because I spent a little bit too much time at up forward, but it's really not that big a deal. She'll jump instead of hopping, and this isn't really a crippling problem, particularly because of the way it works. By doing this, we have introduced a bunch of different edge shifts now. We now have the situation where Action 2 doesn't seem to take a beginning input at all. It just sees down back plus heavy punch, and then a down forward that doesn't have any inputs on it at all. You don't need to worry so much about the complex parts of that. We'll just have Angel do more things, and you'll see that all she does is jump. If I stop her and restart, you will see the forward roll, the jump, and that's it. Because again, we've held the buttons the entire time. She's never going to see it as though she put in an input again. Unfortunately, while this would seem to be probably the most easily changed of her inputs, it's actually one of the most important ones. And I guess we're starting a convention of putting really important but simple inputs in slot 3 because it's the easy place to start after checking whether or not 1 and 2 are working. Just get 3 in and see what you get, because it's usually used to help you test slot 4. Slot 4 is, again from her perspective, back, light kick plus heavy kick, and again we're not actually holding this until the end of the input. What she needs for you to do from there is to very quickly press forward. Now, most of us not using arcade sticks might not be able to go from back to forward super cleanly, but the game is actually kind of lenient even if you do it. So if you do anything like this, it's probably fine. It doesn't tend to matter too much, and we'll get back to why in a bit. You want to hold from her perspective, heavy kick and light kick, back, forward, and end the recording. But you don't actually want to hold the kicks the whole time. So you won't be able to see it again, but it looks closer to that. From Angel's perspective, this is back, heavy kick plus light kick, start recording, release, press the other direction, end the recording. This actually gives her a specific move, but not by itself. But if you input it particular ways, she'll do this, which is not bad. She doesn't do it often enough in regular play to be a problem, and technically it could almost be helpful to learn how to deal with that move as well. So we're iffy on whether or not it's a good or bad thing for her to have this attack in this form. In short, if you see it, don't worry about it. If you don't see it, also don't worry about it. She will do a different move, and then that will be helpful in itself. It is one of the hardest ones to figure out if it's working correctly because of that, though. Because the only way we can test if she has the move I'm talking about, her back forward heavy kick, is to find it using a forward heavy kick. And as you can see, the only thing we have directly allowing for the forward heavy kick there doesn't actually help. The exact conditions under which she does the correct move, therefore, are not quite a mystery to us, but far beyond the scope of explanations on this stream. So overall, if you realize that she is using that dash and never uses a specific hooking axe kick, you might want to try to fix it. But it's not vital because you learn things basically the same either way. Fortunately, the logic of the bot is lenient. Just the getting it to do precisely the same thing is not. And finally, the last action, again from her perspective, down back, light plus heavy kick again. We're again not holding the heavy kick and light kick. You can also do it from straight down. It will cause her to block slightly less, but she's not really going to be blocking that much anyway, and most of the points don't matter in that regard. This matters for other bots in the same group, so it might be worth your time to do. So from there, you begin recording, you very quickly attempt to hit light punch, then heavy punch, then back. And it's fine if, as you see there, it drifts a little bit. It's okay if you release in order to get back to the down, if you try to get a down, all that is fine. You might want to try to avoid hitting the light punch and the heavy punch close together, but even this seems to be okay. In general tests, it works out pretty much the same either way. So let's replay this and show off what she normally does. It mostly should come out as just her using her crouch heavy kick, her sweep, really often. But, as you can see, in here, there is a crouching light punch. And you can either get the stand heavy punch or the crouch heavy punch. And again, for the purposes of the bot's logic, these two are about the same effectiveness. It doesn't so much matter whether or not you get the heavy punch forward or not, because the rest of her flow doesn't change too much. This sort of thing matters a lot more when we start looking at other characters, and is a whole long bot theory stream on its own as to which characters benefit the most from which absolute precision in their inputs. But we will try to get these over the next week or so, even though we will probably release all of the bots at once with the same inputs for expediency. We'll probably try to go through and add this information and tweak them a little bit so that you can know which ones to use in what way. But for now, the codename Snow Angel, those are all of the inputs you require for it. Since you've already seen her play a little bit, let's go straight into a different character and show some of the things that might change if you did in fact get them different. Because these are going to be very slightly different from what will be on the page, partially because I was trying my best to show off the fact that they don't have to be perfect. So, Yashiro, let's go, show us some stuff. Let's talk again, therefore, about point systems and goals. The goal against Yashiro is a little bit more complicated. You're trying to evade some of his stuff, often by rolling backward or rolling forward and then back dashing, which is even harder to understand if you don't understand how Yashiro as a character works. If you are at this range against him, you generally don't want to face him head on. Some characters absolutely can, but if you are the type of character who can just face Yashiro at that range, you probably didn't care about training against Yashiro as a bot. You do still get the point for the crouch, light kick, light punch combo thing. And he doesn't necessarily defend all that terrifyingly well. But depending on your character's role and spacing, because you are using it to test and learn both of these things, roles are normally very similar. Backdashes and certain spacings for moves, not so much. So let's assume you've moved to what is counted as footsie range for Yashiro. And you have a reason to try to get past him to the other side, because it's easier than trying to deal with him in neutral. You would get a point for achieving that just now. Whereas this replaces the point where you're trying to run up and hit him. Or rather run up and throw him, because it's not a good idea. You can play a fair amount of neutral with Yashiro and spend your time instead trying to make sure that when he goes forward, when you have rolled past him but he has done an attack that is about to take him forward or has gone forward as a generality, you're back dashing away. Basically, it's a hit confirm off your own roll. If I roll and Yashiro is still there, I quickly hit crouch light kick and try to get the combo. If Yashiro is no longer there, I backdash as quickly as I can. And depending on the character you're playing, this may be really effective or a terrible idea. Well, no, I wouldn't go so far as to say it's generally terrible against anything. But you get the idea as a whole. He will throw you often enough that when you mistime this, or just randomly sometimes, you take some damage. And the more active he is, the more you will need to do the backdash. If you dash too late, or if you roll too late, you'll find yourself in a lot of trouble usually. But this is a good way to keep yourself from taking too much damage in this matchup. He also defends his head fairly well, so you can't just hop at him as often as you might like. But you can jump and cross him up a lot more often than you might expect for a character of his style. You should judge that though based on how good you feel your own character is at doing that. So you do want to anti-air him, you do want to roll into stuff. Now even though Yashiro is quite good at anti-airs in general, you still want to consider seeing if you can get jump damage. Specifically, cross-up jump damage, because if Yashiro is watching for you to get to him, he's usually not in the same mental state. The player is not necessarily thinking about the same things. So you go for the cross-up when you realize you're about to try to hit me, but I could jump forward out of the way before that happens. And of course, if you're good enough at doing cross-up hop, even better. He also tends to be adaptive in that if you poke at him for long enough and then try to set up those situations, you will in fact get anti-aired if you were even slightly too slow. Reminding you, oh wait, no, I was supposed to roll there, not jump. Unfortunately, we can definitely admit that a lot of this isn't very helpful at the lower levels, which is why we give Big Fire as your primary bot. And this is more so a secondary once you've gotten so used to that you can handle people who just either hop all the time or jump away all the time and then hop back in. This is still a thing you can train with Angel, specifically the quick approach, block, quick approach, crouch light kick, quick approach, throw, or even quick approach and prepare to anti-air the hop. But just verifying and clarifying that Yashiro's purpose in this bot set is not meant to teach you anything until you get to the very highest levels, where you have to care about playing neutral, playing footsies with someone who isn't just always hopping everywhere. Now we move to Shermie. Yashiro isn't terribly affected by more or less precise quarter circles in inputs. He doesn't tend to overdo anything just because of this. Shermie, on the other hand, does way too much of certain things and way too little of other things based on the inputs you've put in. As a main example, she doesn't have anything that will cause her to do her spinning kick, but we don't want her to. Because again, this is about teaching offense. If she gets a separate bot that will somehow teach you to deal with that move, well, that'll be great, but it's not a terribly complicated move to deal with, so instead, she is the one you face when you need to learn to keep yourself off the ground or react to her dashes. She doesn't have the greatest of anti-airs either, so you don't have to worry as much about jumping at her and then getting hurt terribly if you time the jump correctly. She has options, namely effectively an uppercut she can take you out of position with, but it's a lot about, can you get this jump right without getting grabbed? Because she will generally grab you whenever you mess up the jump, and she will grab you sometimes if you stand still for too long. She also has a long enough standing heavy punch, as being demonstrated here, that you can't just approach and do as you like. And finally, she's actually a relatively complex character to punish because she's not necessarily trying to rush at you in the first place. So she's quite similar, except basically you're not aiming to cross up against Shermie, you're just trying to get a jump. Because of how specific she is, you get no points related to throws. You're just looking for, can I make this jump, and from this jump make the full combo. And when I say full combo, I mean the combo that started with the jump attack itself. Depending on your character's jumping heavy kick, this can be quite easy, but the jumping heavy kick also often gets you punished in some other way. So you should be a little bit careful there. Similarly, her tendency to roll out of positions makes it a little bit rougher on you. If you want to make this particular version of the bot more effective, you can do so relatively easily by changing a minor thing in the last input in Action 5 so that you go all the way to back before you hit the heavy punch. Basically, you start from sweep, i.e. down heavy kick, and then actually do a quarter circle back plus punch, and this will help. It has to be heavy punch, but it's not absolutely required that you get it perfect, nor is it required that you let go of the button. So you don't have to worry so much about that. It's just changing the flow of the last input to actually have a intentional quarter circle in it. If you realize that the character has an intentional quarter circle in it, you can use it for Shermie more easily than some others. So once again, jump, combo. This part is easy. You can throw her when she rolls, and you can learn to get out of the way of that move. Rolling past her is a thing you can still use as a main test, but because she is a grappler, and she doesn't actually advance, unlike Yashiro where you're likely to get away with this, understand that for Shermie, you are very unlikely to get away with this, and there isn't a really good reason to do it most of the time. So we are not considering at the moment keeping that as a main point system. She's not completely done. She has one more point system that we need to work on for absolute verifying this is the most effective we can make the training with this bot. But if you come up with something for yourself, by all means use it. Because she will knock you out of the air, she will catch you even if you jump late. And if you don't jump out of the way of her dashing forward grab, you're probably going to get punished in a lot of ways. One of the things we're considering is related to the neutral jump and back jump as ways of defending against her and seeing if you can get some damage off those still. But again, this seems really character dependent at the moment, so we're not necessarily thinking this is a great plan so far. We'll definitely have something for you, but at the moment it's not entirely clear what that last point is going to be. So you can still go for the crouch light kick, usually by just running up to her in the same way. But you don't really want to roll through. You jump now instead of much else, and you don't get a point for anti-airing Shermie, mainly because she will put herself in the air in other situations, and because you don't really want to do this in actual matches either. It's usually a trick, and you're going to get hurt more so for trying than the other way around. Chris fortunately has a full set of points and is again more helpful because he does train a completely different set of things once again. Chris is always moving, but he also has relatively long range in a lot of positions and situations. Depending on how the inputs are done, he will use a lot of that move. But in general, you can't be sure whether or not he will on any given run. So you can get very few points for dealing with it, or quite a lot. I think we've tested enough to be sure that there's a consistent chance that he will do both that and the punch one, which is you've just seen. And therefore he is practically an offense training himself. He's going to have enough offense that your own offense has to be very carefully considered. But he's still meant for training offense, and in his case it's specifically training offense after you've blocked his. This is actually a lot easier to set up than you might think, and is pretty good for training as a whole. Because he can do that, which is effectively a grab, and getting close enough to block something Chris does and still be able to hit him afterwards is really hard. You can't just mash out of stuff either. Because of the way his knockback works, you will get a point for blocking and punishing his slide. You get a different point for blocking and punishing his flip kick uppercut. But remember that, once again, the thing you're trying to do here for your own purposes, to train to get better, is to get close to Chris to the point where when he attacks, you have an advantage. And he will not go quietly. Using your own long-range moves is functionally a cop-out. Don't do it. You have to get into range, and it's functionally teaching you to dash and block. Not only dash and block, but not flinch too quickly in the blocking part. Otherwise, even if you do succeed at blocking, you will get no points because you can't do anything. You can freely roll, and in fact it can be very helpful to roll earlier and then just block right in front of his face. But even this is not easy. Chris will not let you get away with this. He's a good test for when you just feel like you need to try to keep up with something that's going way too quickly. Because he goes very quickly. And as just demonstrated, if you just go, well, let me jump at him. Sure, that works, but he could theoretically beat that quite easily. So, unfortunately, unlike Yashiro and Shermie, who you can at least fake out, you don't get points for jumping on Chris at all. You wouldn't really want to do it in an actual match either, because while he doesn't necessarily get a ton of damage, he gets a lot of control from doing that, and it's not in your best interests. So once again, you are punishing specifically when he does that move, when he slides at you. You can punish sweep if you want to, but it doesn't really matter. And when he does that move but misses, which is an entirely different style of punish. But again, to get yourself into the correct flow, normally you want to be trying to get close to him at the point where he's doing all of these things, rather than just blocking long enough that he eventually gets there on his own. But even those who are starting off with it, who just need to just block, need to take a break, he's still some useful help because he will break your guard that way, even if you're crouch blocking. He will quickly get to the other side of you as needed, and he will jump. and you will get the point for anti-airing him, but he's not going to jump that often, and his hitboxes when jumping are very strange. So you learn quite a lot from anti-airing, but you probably would also learn more if you were attempting to advance on him and still looking out for the anti-air, which is one of the things you need to train the most in this game. I would have considered this the hardest possible form of this bot, but then Kula appeared and gave the bot the other half of its name. Kula is fought with similar, almost as a combination of the previous three. In general, you want to roll and get your crouch, light kick, punish happening. You also want to punish her uppercut, but you want to go for a big punish here. Similarly with Chris, you would want to go for a big punish, but for Kula in particular, you shouldn't even give yourself the point unless you get a really big punish. For many of them, you can also substitute in your Shatter Strike. If you're challenging yourself quite hard on certain things because you won't have enough meter anyway for too many Shatter Strikes. But if you find that you have a point that's too easy from just this stream, substitute the Shatter Strike for it and see what you get. Kula is quite sensitive in terms of the input department. You actually have to check and make sure that everything is basically exactly as given for her to be effective in her bot role. If she has too many of specific inputs, she keeps on doing super constantly. And in cases, you can have her completely miss out on either her Shatter Strike, which she has, she just isn't using it that often, which is intended, and certain of her other moves come up much less often. Mostly because the timings for stuff Kula does change according to how close you are to her and whether or not you're trying to get in even more. But you are trying to jump. Generally though, she will uppercut often enough that if you jump incorrectly, you will get beat up for it. But as you can see from that move, her breath is jumpable if you react to it quickly enough. And in general, she will either not be there or beat you up for doing it anyway, because almost all of her moves do a good job of defending that spot in front of her if you jump incorrectly when she does breath. If you take too long to jump, similarly you get caught by breath and it doesn't matter. In her case, you are once again throwing when she crosses you. When she rolls forward, and she does have quite a few timings where she will, try to throw her out of her roll. This is also an option for Angel. And some of these things will depend on your character, but because the characters in this game are so complicated, we're probably not going to give a whole list of this character does this and this character does that. You know what you want to train, more or less. Probably if you're at the point of using this bot, you have a pretty good idea what you want to train, and can therefore decide how best to spend your time and which points to count in order to make your improvements. As you can see shown there, incorrectly spaced jumps fail, incorrectly timed jumps fail. Hops don't necessarily fail, but you still have similar problems to all the rest of the jumps because she wasn't letting you stand there in the first place. And again, your goal is to actually land a combo. But the main thing you're actually looking for is to see if you can whiff punish this character in neutral with your long buttons, because she does take long enough for things other than breath as well. So yes, you are going for roll into this, very important, You are punishing her uppercut whenever that happens. You are trying to jump when she does breath in the correct way. But we don't necessarily suggest taking the anti-air point. Instead, depending on what you face and what you consider important to train at the moment, if your opponents just jump at you all the time, sure, anti-air point if you must. But you can improve more in many cases by understanding how to use your longest button to whiff punish her in neutral. And the interesting and useful part of this is, it is good for getting you out of the habit of using just crouch heavy kick for this. Even on characters where that's a slide, Cula's movement and flows tend to counter that pretty well. So you could go for it, but chances are this is not a thing you want to be using in neutral against this character all that often, or at least against this bot. I'm not entirely sure it doesn't work on the character. Most importantly though, this is talking about whiff punishing, as in your opponent has taken an action, but she doesn't tend to spend a lot of time taking just random actions. She doesn't just punch most of the time, she doesn't just kick most of the time. You have to deal with a bunch of other things she can do, and that will speed you up as well. Because you spend this time at this range, it's more likely that when Cula rolls, she will not actually roll past you. And therefore it can help you learn how to throw her in better timing. But again, even though that technically counted because it was a punish to an uppercut, it's not the punish you would want to do. If you find yourself throwing too much as a result of her using even her lighter uppercut, you probably need to train a bit more. That counts as a point, even though it was, in fact, the sweep. And we see from the same Kyo point, oh, that didn't work because I wasn't close enough. There is one more character that you can use if you, for some reason, want to try a new character but don't want to re-input the entire Big Fire bot just to do the style of practice that the Big Fire bot grants you, mainly perfecting close range hits and strong punishes. So I'm throwing this in as a final bit of information before this stream closes, just so you don't end up wishing that you had done more training with the Big Fire before moving here and then not knowing what to do as your option. You can always, as far as I've seen, you can always activate good old Joe Higashi and more or less wait for Joe to do stuff that he shouldn't do. You also get a little bit out of this if you try to jump at him and do many of the same things. Roll into crouch light kick, jump into combos. But if you are not certain that you have things correct, there you go. He definitely has moves that will put him close enough to you for you to use your close counterattack, but could fail. More so his own rising knee uppercut style move than the dash rushing one. So this is just a quick way out for when you realize, oh, I should have practiced that combo more, or I think I'm going to try to take up this character, but the bot I have saved, or the bot I have time and want to input, is the Snow Angel one. I don't want to have to put in two bots. And he's relatively effective in terms of his outputs as well, and some things with just making sure that he's not too predictable. If he feels too predictable, there's a chance that you had some input off somewhere, but even that, sometimes he just gets that way for a while and it isn't really related to how well or poorly you input the thing. In general though, you do play against this bot very defensively, similar to how you play against Kyo. And you do much of the same rolling out of position, waiting for him to do specific things, and so on. Depending on his inputs, he tends to not do any of his supers, which I found surprising, but not in the usual way of surprising. Mainly because a lot of the other characters use their super more than I would expect them to, and he has similar inputs for his, but I guess it's just the rhythm, because that does come up in bots quite often. The reason he doesn't do the super is simply because he's usually doing something else, already animating at the timing when he would have done it. So bear it in mind that even if you see the super on Joe, it's very unlikely to be common because his rhythm just doesn't allow for it. And in fact, that brings us to the end of this stream. I managed to get it all into 1 hour, possibly because I left out a lot of complicated explanations. When you go to our website 2-mk.org on Sunday, just before or during, possibly even after our DNF Duel Battle Lounge, there will be full instructions on how much power gauge to give yourself for normal training, how much power gauge to give your opponent, and a rehash of all the inputs, the specific shifts you might want to make for particular characters if you really only wanted to fight that one, and all of the point systems, both of the variant forms. As always, I hope that this is helpful to you, especially because the inputs for this, while a little frustrating for maybe the 5th one, aren't really all that bad or overwhelming compared to most, and you'll probably be able to tell fairly quickly whether or not they're working correctly just from Angel. In all situations, we would suggest that even if you intend to use the bot for a different character, you use Angel for the inputs, simply because it's easier to tell that everything is working correctly, and you don't want to be messing that up and then having to go back later and change it, because we still don't know quite what causes the game to lose access to a bot and force you to do the re-input. For now, if you're the type that saves things to your PS Plus, we'll just suggest, as always, that if you do upload your save data, even if you've lost your bot, you can just re-download it and it will be back available again. Probably. If you find that's not the case, then it's probably that the problem is somewhere else. Which is great to know, but not necessarily helpful at the time. You'll find out on our Twitter 2_MK_FGC if we have any issues, delays, problems with releases in general. And if next week we have anything new to say about this bot set, we will do as we did before and have another stream. This time I'm confident enough that I won't be making any serious changes over the weekend that won't just be a variant, because this, after much work, turned out pretty well. So you can assume that this stream is at least reliable for inputs and related concepts. Whereas you might want to recheck for additional characters we managed to get to work somehow, or realize that one of the inputs we were using could be changed while retaining the main one and still be useful for that one. Alright, Angel, give us a big send-off of some kind. I know you've got your super, but I'm not actually going to wait the entire time. No, she's just going to hit me normally, like, as if I'm doing nothing whatsoever, huh? Oh well. Then, by that, this has been Rillian for Team 2MK. Good luck with your training and good night, everyone.